Good evening. Welcome to PoliticIt podcast. We're here with Sheriff Kelly Sparks from Davis County.
Yes, sir.
Great to have you here. And you just took a second term. Is that right?
Yes, I've just started my second term as Davis County Sheriff. So.
That's good. So let's talk a little bit about you and let people get to know you a little bit better. How did you get into being a sheriff?
Well, it's a long road for me, right? I was raised in Davis County, so Davis County's been my home for a long time. I started as a young man at the Davis County Sheriff's Office. I actually started working there in 1983.
Wow.
So I've been there quite a bit of time. Had just a great career working at the Sheriff's Office and working for the citizens of Davis County. It's been wonderful. I had the opportunity to go up through the ranks. I was a deputy sheriff paramedic. We had a kind of a unique program at Davis County where all our deputies were paramedic providers for the county. Worked in investigations, was a SWAT team commander, was a hostage negotiator, PIO, went up, served as chief deputy for a few years. Did actually 23 years at the Davis County Sheriff's Office and basically worked in every division there and almost every assignment. And then I left Davis County and became the director of the police academy at Weber State University.
Oh, that's an interesting. I wasn't aware of that.
Very enjoyable. I love teaching new folks getting into this profession and had the opportunity to do that for 2 years. And then I was asked to come down to Peace Officer Standards and Training at the state. And I was the deputy director of Utah Post for about 10 years. And then decided it was time to come back to Davis County. So
wow.
Ran for sheriff and came back.
That's fascinating. So what got into you that made you want to, the sheriff's an elected position.
It is.
And so, what got into you that made you want to do that?
Well, it's kind of interesting. I never aspired to be sheriff necessarily. I think law enforcement has been my calling. I've really enjoyed working in law enforcement. But I think having an elected sheriff is really important for our country. And the office of sheriff is the only elected law enforcement position in our country, right? And that's important because as sheriff, I'm directly responsible to the citizens who elect me, to the citizens of Davis County. And so I think, I think after the many years that I spent at the sheriff's office and then the time that I had to work at other places, I just had a real desire to come back and work at Davis County.
So do you think it was good for you to have gone like to Weber State and to the state before you went on to become the sheriff?
Yeah, I think it really was. It just gives a new experience, right? New ideas. And I knew very well after spending that many years at the sheriff's office, I knew very well what the sheriff's office did and how it ran and how we did things. But to be able to get out and see how things are done in other areas was really important. And as deputy director at Post, I had the opportunity to see how things are done statewide. So I was able to work with police chiefs and sheriffs all over the state and really see how, kind of a broader perspective.
So tell me a little bit about that office. I'm not as familiar with that particular office.
So Peace Officer Standards and Training, it's called POST, right? That's probably what most people know it by, established by the legislature back in 1969. And it is really the agency that trains and certifies all peace officers in the state. So whether you work for a city police department or a county sheriff's office, or no matter where you work in the state of Utah, you have to be certified by Utah Post. And so our responsibility there really is to do basic training, in-service training, and we were also tasked with doing peace officer misconduct investigations. So if somebody violates the ethics or violates the law, violates the ethics of peace officer standards, then they can be sanctioned by Post and actually have their certification.
Now, does that post that directorship of Post, does that interface with the legislature? Did you have any of those responsibilities? Or
yeah, so so as a deputy director, I was mostly responsible for the day-to-day operations.
Okay.
The director had much more responsibility with the legislature, with running bills and connecting with the legislature and with the governor's office and with the Department of Public Safety and kind of those more administrative roles.
Right.
Yeah. But that's an important part of what we do. More and more, I think you're seeing and you've probably seen in your experience in the legislature that legislatures relying more and more on post to take the lead in model policies and to take the lead in some of the training that we're doing, in-service training, and that's a perfect place for that sort of thing.
Yeah. So what are your major concerns today, being the sheriff?
There are a lot. I think probably for me, one of the major concerns is just the attitude and the kind of public discourse about law enforcement. I don't think that it's necessarily that law enforcement in Davis County or in Weber County or in northern Utah reflects what's going on nationally, but I'm certainly concerned about what's happened the last few years about how law enforcement has been portrayed in the national media and how it's been challenged. And it's not a bad thing to challenge law enforcement. I think we like that, right? We want the people to hold us accountable, and we want to be responsive to that. But we have to do it in a way that's appropriate and measured and not give up the many gains that we've attained over the last many years.
Yeah, I'm sure that the whole movement with Black Lives Matter, even though it didn't materialize as much here as it did across the country, I think that probably has created some challenges in terms of recruiting people. And
for sure, I think it's made a lot of officers question, their desire to be in law enforcement. I mean, and I've had the unique opportunity, right, to work with many, many new recruits coming into this profession, and they are great people who are highly motivated to serve the public. And I think it's made many of them question whether or not they want to continue working in the profession, because if they're not being, if they're not being seen as helpful by the community, it's hard for them to feel fulfilled in that role. And so we have seen a lot of folks leave the profession because of some of those movements.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure, I think just a general respect, with we have some really great young people, but
right.
But some are brought up to.
And I would say that we are very fortunate. I feel very fortunate as the sheriff of Davis County to be able to work in this community, because I know that we have great support from our community in Davis County and here in Weber County and other places in Utah. We have a great support network, and the people support us a lot. But that's not what people hear every night on the 6 o'clock news, right? They hear what's going on in many other maybe large cities across the country, and it affects them. And so they don't maybe have personal experience with the law enforcement officers in their community, and so they maybe get painted with that broad brush.
Yeah.
But we are very fortunate, and I feel very
fortunate. I know there's been a movement in the legislature to kind of swing the pendulum back.
Right.
Towards, I mean, I think there's always been a lot of respect for law enforcement, but I think there's been these other forces that have caused, some of the legislation, I think, to go the wrong direction.
Yeah. And I think that, that visualization of a pendulum is probably a good thing, right? Because we want to have both. We want to have good support for law enforcement, but we also want to challenge what law enforcement does to make sure that we continue to do what's appropriate, make sure we continue to be on that cutting edge of training and experience and serving the public. So I think it's a balance, right? We need to find the right balance. And sometimes you have these voices that are loud, but maybe not a majority of people that swing the pendulum one way. And we've got to bring it back to something that's a little more rational. So
yeah, I think that's I think that's right. I think that, in general, I think you do have broad-based support. Of course, nobody likes getting pulled over, right?
Sure.
but it is, but the respect for law enforcement, I think, is really important. We're going to take a break.
Okay.
And we'll come back.
Okay.
Okay. Welcome back. We're talking with Kelly Sparks, Davis County Sheriff. Nice conversation so far. Let's talk a little bit about, I know one thing that's been a concern in the legislature is mental health issues with law enforcement. What have you seen, and what do we need to think about a little bit?
Well, I think that's probably one of the most critical areas. Mental health is a critical area, not just for law enforcement, for all of us, really, right? And how mental health affects our officers' ability to do their job, how it affects the people that they interact with on the street, the people who have substance use disorders, that sort of thing. And fortunately, I think we've come a long way with provision of mental health services to law enforcement officers. I'll share just a quick experience from early in my career, and this is a story about a coworker who was one of the first female paramedics in the state of Utah. Really, went to a house fire, and at that time, Davis County Sheriff's Office, we were deputy sheriff paramedics, and we provided paramedic service for the entirety of the county. She was called to this house fire, and the house was fully engulfed, and fire department arrived, and at that time, this had been the mid-'80s. Most of the fire department was volunteer, but they did a good job. They went in and extinguished the fire inside the home, but unfortunately, inside that home, there were two small children who were deceased from that fire. One of the firefighters picked one of those children up and brought it outside and put the child in the arms of this fairly new female paramedic. And I don't want to be too graphic here for your listeners, but the body of that child was so warm that it actually burnt, caused some burns to this paramedic. And obviously a very tragic and traumatic event that affected her psychologically, right, as you would expect. She wanted some help. She was having trouble processing that, went to her supervisor, asked for help, and supervisor went to the administration and asked what was available. And I think the response from the administration was something like, well, if she can't learn to deal with those situations, maybe she shouldn't be in this profession, right? And as crass as that seems like it is, I don't think it was coming from a place of non-empathy. I think it was coming from a place of caring in a strange sort of way.
Right.
I mean, the reality is it was coming from a place of not knowing what the resources were, and really from not having the resources that we have today. Fortunately, today we have a lot better treatment modalities that are available. We have a lot better access to those treatment modalities. And I think, in the old days it was, well, you got to be tough.
Right.
That's what people were told, and you do have to be tough in this profession. But I think what that means is that you have to be resilient.
Right.
You have to have the internal resources to be resilient, and the reality is nobody comes pre-wired with those internal resources. Those are things that need to be worked on and developed. And I think over the years we've become much better at recognizing that.
Well, and it's so much better for people not to bury those things inside themselves, right? Where that trauma kind of leads them down a dark path.
Yeah, a lot of those tough guys were dealing with their trauma in unhealthy ways, right? Which led to additional problems. So it's something that I think is really important. And we have peer support teams, we have mental health counselors, we have employee assistance programs. At our office, we've tried to develop a wide variety of opportunities for our deputies to get those mental health resources, because it's not a one size fits all.
Well, and the story you're talking about is something that doesn't happen to everybody, right?
Right.
It's one of those rare events that could be very triggering on somebody. And we just had an event in North Ogden where I live where police showed up. There was a gunman that had already shot one person, and I think he was dead set on emptying every gun he had on the police that came there. And these were officers that hadn't dealt with that before, and so that's got to cause some trauma.
It does, and I think probably one of the best things we've tried to do is just change that conversation, right? We do want our officers to be tough. We want them to be strong mentally. We want them to be strong physically, right? If you're in a physical fight, we want you to be strong, and we know that involves exercising and being healthy, but it also involves training. It also involves learning how to maintain a tactical advantage and how to use defensive tactics skills, right? And mental health is much the same. If you're in a physical fight and you tear a muscle or sprain an ankle, we're going to send you to the doctor,
Right.
so that he can treat that and you can get stronger and better and come back and be safe and working. And mental health should be the same. If you're in a mental fight, which all of these traumatic events are, and you tear a mental health muscle, we should send you to a treatment provider, and,
Right.
and you get treatment, you get better, and you come back and you're
You're
safe.
stronger
You're stronger
and safer. Yeah. Yeah. I think that I think that's important. I'm glad you brought that up. That's a great example, and it's something that we have to be aware of as citizens. We certainly don't want people exiting the profession.
Right.
Right. I mean, that's been a major problem, right?
It has.
In terms of hiring.
Yeah, it has, and it's been something that I'm very concerned about, right? We need really good people in this profession. Not just that we need them for the profession, but we need them for the public.
Right.
We need good people. We need to have good numbers of applicants into these positions so that we can have the best people, and those conversations are important, and be helping us be able to do that.
Yeah, and I think as public servants in terms of politics, I think we need to be aware of these issues and make sure that we're providing the right environment. I know I was really proud of our mayor in North Ogden. I mean, we've now built they're in the process of building a new police station and facilities that have been needed for a long time. Raises for people that are there, and it's amazing how sometimes these things get kicked down the road, right?
Right.
Where you don't have a wheel that's necessarily squeaking as much as it should be.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'm sure, one of the things I was thinking about is you probably saw this in your job at the state of people moving to different agencies, right? And the bigger counties may be offering more money, so there's movement.
Yeah, there's been a lot of competition within the profession, right, from different agencies, and it's really kind of changed law enforcement, I think, probably forever. It used to be that somebody would start at an agency and work for that agency for 25 or 30 years, like I did, right?
Yeah.
And then maybe go somewhere else. And what you're seeing nowadays is a much more mobile workforce. So, I don't know, a large percentage of the people that we've hired at the sheriff's office in the last few years have come to us from other agencies for whatever reason, not always because the pay is higher, but because of the environment, the conditions, whatever. There's lots of reasons why people change, but every one of those that have come to us from another agency have brought ideas with them,
right?
New ways of doing things, and have learned new ways of doing things when they got there. So I think it's been, although there's a lot of negative around that mobile workforce, there's also a lot of positive that I think comes with it, where we learn and grow from other agencies and from other experience. I really feel like those folks that we've hired from other agencies at our office have made us better. They've made the sheriff's office better.
Well, and having been trained as an economist, competition is always healthy, even though it's hard, right?
Right.
It's hard in terms of the legislature keeping up with the salaries that that are happening different places, and being aware of the difficulties there. But I think what you shared is important, because a little competition and moving around makes somebody probably more resilient, maybe you have broader range of experiences.
Right. I think that's absolutely right. And when we're dealing with an issue at our office, one of those folks who have experience somewhere else can say, oh, we dealt with it this way over here, and we can assess that. And maybe it's a better way of doing it than we've been doing it.
Yeah, and the other thing is, when they move to a bigger city, maybe they're at risk a lot more.
Yeah.
And they come, and that helps too, because it causes maybe wages to go up one place and not as much somewhere else, where people think they can balance the work-life thing a little better in a smaller agency.
Yeah. And I think overall, I think you're absolutely right. It's made the base level of wages everywhere go up a little bit, which is good for law enforcement officers and good to help us recruit and bring people into the profession that we want in the profession.
Yeah. I think I think that is important. So what are some of your parting thoughts in terms of what you think the public should know?
Well, I think that what the public should know is that we really appreciate the support that we get from the public that we have here. We talk about peace officers' mental health, and I was thinking there's something that every citizen can do, and that is just simply to let officers know that they're appreciated, that they have the public support. I think we're fortunate here in the community we live in that we know we have that support. But I'll tell you, in my experience, in my many years of service, I've probably had more people in the last 2 or 3 years acknowledge and say thank you for your service than I've ever had before. And it's meaningful, it's helpful. So it doesn't have to be something large or drastic to help officers feel good about what they're doing, but just acknowledging them and knowing that they're appreciated.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate it. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you very much.
Again, Kelly Sparks from Davis County Sheriff. Great to have you, and we'll see you next week.
Hey, thank you.
Thank you.